Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Crystal and this is Insta Creations. In this week's video tutorial, it's not necessarily going to be a stitch of the week. This is kind of more just like maybe tips and tricks. I did get a question or a suggestion from a follower who wanted to know about making edges straight. So there is different techniques that you can use. Some work better than others. And I think the other key thing to making sure that your edges are straight is counting your stitches in each row to make sure that you have the same amount of stitches. What I found when I first started crocheting was that very last stitch doesn't actually look like that stitch is there, like it kind of gets hidden. And I'll show you what I mean when I go through a sample here. But I did post a picture of the various different ways that you can use to do straight stitches. This is working with double crochet. I think that's probably one of the hardest ones to get your straight edges. Where if you're just using single crochet, chaining one is, ideal. It's gonna, give you the straightest edge if your pattern just uses single crochet. And you can kind of use the same process for triple crochet with what I'm going to show you here. So the top one here, and I'm going to put a picture throughout of the one that I labeled on my post the other day, just so you guys can kind of, see as I'm going along. So I'll work in the top left corner first. So this one here uses, you're doing a chain 3, but you actually skip the first stitch. I find with this one, it leaves the gap. I mean, you do have this nice straight edge here, but you will get these bigger gaps throughout the sides there that you can see that they're there. And then they alternate back and forth. But I mean, you do get a nice straight edge with that one. And I will go through a sample for each one. So this one here is actually doing a chain 2 instead of a chain 3, but you work in the very first stitch. So again, it does give you that straight edge. You have less of a gap now, so there's not much of a gap there. And then this one here is just doing a chain 1. So again, it really tightens it up along the edge there. Yeah, I think it just brings it closer together. This is the one that I kind of prefer to use the most, is just doing a chain 1, and it gives you a nice straight edge. The other thing too is that this one here is you can do what's called a foundation single crochet. It does kind of the same thing as what the single crochet does. You still get that nice straight edge. I do find that it can be a little tricky, or like when you're working into your last stitch, it's a little tight and hard to get through. So I personally don't like using that stitch, but I'm going to show you how to do all 4 of these, and that will be coming up shortly. Okay, so for the first one that I'm going to show you here, we're going to do the chain 3 with the double crochet and the straight edge that you get. I'm going to put a photo up in the corner there so that you can see which one I'm referring to. I'll leave it up for a few seconds there. So what I've done here is I've done a chain of 10, and then I've went across and I did 9 double crochets just to get this started. So now we're going to do a chain of 3. So we're going to turn our work. So normally when we work in our stitches, and I will say this too, that a lot of the time patterns will say that this counts as your first stitch. Even when it says that in a pattern, sometimes I don't always follow along with that, because again, I find it leaves that gap when you treat it that way. But for the purpose of this video, I'll show you what they're talking about. So I did a chain 3, so now it's telling me that it wants me to count this as my first chain. So in order to do another 9 to get 9 double crochets, because that's what this row has here, and if this is going to be considered our first one, then we need to not work in the base like we normally would. We're going to skip a stitch and we're going to work into the next one. So that means that we're going to go ahead and we're going to do 8 across the row. So I'm only going to do a couple rows for each one to show you, but that's why at the beginning of this video I did discuss each one a little bit, just to kind of, you know, show you what I was gonna do. So yeah, so personally I don't prefer this one because of the gaps that it does create, but I mean, if it is easier for you to do, then that's of course your choice. So here is the other situation that I was also kind of referring to as well. I want to show you this is technically our last stitch right here. So see how it kind of folds over and it doesn't actually look like that is our last stitch. It almost kind of looks like we're at the end. And I think that's where, you know, a lot of people when they're first starting out, and even I did that when I was beginning, is that you think you're at the end and you're actually not. So then when you go to start your next row and you work across, then you start seeing your pattern kind of, you know, start doing this angle because you're not working in the same amount of stitches for each row. So that's why I always say that when you're first starting out, make sure to count your stitches in each row, even if you do it every other row, so then at least if you do make a mistake, you don't have to you know, take it all out if you don't count until like every 5th row or something. But that just makes it a little bit easier. The other suggestion that I also have is that you can also just take use a stitch marker. I'm just going to use a piece of thread because that's what I just have sitting here right beside me right now. And just put that like in your stitch. I'll show you when I start the next row what I mean. But if you have that marker in there, then you know that that's the last stitch that you're going to work into. So I'll show you when I would insert that stitch marker. But yeah, so we do want to go into that stitch. So again, we're going to do a chain 3. And then we turn our work, and instead of working in the base, we're going to work into that next stitch there. So we skip a stitch. Okay. So what this is going to do now is this is going to kind of create this gap here, which is kind of what you're going to work your last double crochet into. So now when we get to the end, you'll kind of be able to see where your stitch is a little bit better. So again, we're still counting this one as our first double crochet. So we're going to work into this one here. And now, like this is so I got my hair everywhere. So that chain 3 that we did there, and that's considered our first double crochet. So we're just going to work right into that one to finish off the row. So this is what I mean by the gaps that you kind of get when you're working into that. That it just kind of becomes like your edge is pretty straight, but you do get that gap there, which, you know, I mean, as you're going along, I don't know, for me, I can notice it, so it kind of bothers me a little bit, but I don't know, I mean, it does work. It does actually give you really nice straight edges. But yeah, so that is the first technique. So I'm just going to stop this video and I will be back with the second technique. All right, so we are back for the second technique for getting straight edges with your work when you're working in rows. So with this one again, I just did a chain 10 and then I did 9 double crochets across. So instead of chaining 3, we're going to actually just chain 2. But this time we're going to work right into the base of the stitch. So again, we're just going to, continue with our 9 double crochets across. And so again, here we are at the end, and I think it's because sometimes like your yarn curls, and when it does that, it does really make that last stitch really hidden. So that's why I turn it around, and you can see that we still have that stitch here because we have that V shape. Okay, and then again, we're just going to chain 2, and then we will just do our double crochets across, and then I'll show you what that looks like when we come back to the end here, or when we get to the end. Okay, so again, we have that where it kind of curls. That one's a little more easier to see just because of the chain 2, but again, it kind of, you know, looks like you might be at your end. And I mean, it all has to do with like gauge and that, like in how tight you crochet. Like if you're really loose, you know, sometimes that stitch, you know, it might be a little more apparent that it's there, but if you crochet really tightly, I feel like I'm kind of like in between, and it depends on what I'm doing. Like if I'm making stuffed animals, I tend to crochet really tight. But yeah, so that is what the chain 2. I think this one, I like this one probably the best. It doesn't look all bunchy along the edge. You don't get the gaps. But yeah, so that is just by using the chain 2. So again, I'll be back and I will show you how to do the single crochet, or just doing a chain 1. Okay, we are back for another technique, the third one. So again, I did a chain 10. I got my 9 double crochets across here. So this time we are just going to do a chain 1. And we're going to do the same process again. We're just going to work 9 double crochets across, and I'll do another row to show you what the edges look like by doing just by doing a chain 1. Okay, so again, we have one more stitch to go here, and we'll do just a chain 1. I'll do one more row. Okay, so there you have it. So that is what your edge looks like now with just doing a chain 1. It looks pretty similar, I think, to doing the chain 2. It does kind of look a little tighter in through here. It might tend to make it curl a little bit more, but depending on your pattern, if you're, I mean, with the sample, it's gonna tend to really start to curl like that because it's just a tiny area that we're working in. But again, I like this one as much as I like the chain 2. I still think it gives it a nice straight edge as well. So that is with just doing the chain 1, and I'll be back with the final technique. Using a foundation single crochet. So once again, I've chained 10 and I've done my 9 double crochets across. So now we're not gonna do any chains. We're gonna turn our work. We're going to put a single crochet right into that first stitch. So now we have these 2 loops. So we are going to go put our hook back in through the first loop, but don't go through the second because it's just going to undo your stitch. And then we are going to do another single crochet. So right there, that gave us our height for a double crochet. It's pretty neat, eh? And then we're just going to go across again with our double crochets, and then I'll show you again when we get to the end, because I'm going to have to do another row back to that because it's a little, it's the part that I find the most trickiest, which is why I don't usually use this technique. And again, that could be because my gauge is, tighter, but you'll see what I mean here in a second. So again, there's our last stitch, which was kind of hidden. So we don't chain, we just turn. We're going to work a single crochet into that first stitch. So we have our 2 loops. We want to work into the first one and just do another single crochet, which gives us the height of a double crochet. So again, just going to go all the way across with our 9 double crochets. Okay, so here we are at the end. So this was our first foundation single crochet that we did. So you're going to see here that we now have these like 2 V's that we're working with. We need to work into that top V. That's the one that we want to finish off our double crochet. So I find, and that seemed to go a lot easier, so maybe I must have crocheted a little bit looser than when I did in my sample. But I find that that gets to be a little harder to get into, I guess. But yeah, that is a sample of doing your straight edges with just a foundation single crochet. I think it's really kind of neat. I actually do think that it really, I don't know, I guess like it's pretty straight and there's not like a lot going on. You don't have a lot of bumps. It is a really good technique, but again, I just find that sometimes working into that last V there, see, this one probably would be a little harder to get my stitch into. But yeah, so you just kind of got to hold it and get your hook through there. But I mean, again, I think all 3 samples, are really good options to use when trying to get straight edges when you're doing double crochets. Like I said, single crochets, you just would continue to do like a chain 1. And then with like half double crochets, I would also recommend just doing like a chain 1. I think it probably mentions doing like a chain 2 sometimes, but with half double crochet, I just do a chain 1. But yeah, so that is the way to get straight edges. And also just knowing that, count your stitches, make sure that you have the same amount in each row, because if you don't, then you've either skipped a stitch or you've missed that very last row that sometimes gets, or not last row, that last stitch that gets hidden. But yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that I was able to kind of help you out if you've been struggling with how to do straight edges. But stay tuned. I will be hopefully releasing more videos each week. I'm trying to up my game, I guess, with my tutorials because I have a lot of fun doing it. So anyways, I'll see you real soon. Bye.